So welcome everyone to our session on reducing the carbon and environmental footprint of procurement. What is the role and what are key findings of lifecycle analysis, notably in the humanitarian sector? Maybe just a few words. I'm just trying to get the slides. Okay, here we go. So before I introduce the panel, just a few words about why are we even talking about the topic. So as I think many of you know, procurement is really a key driver of impacts in the humanitarian, but also the health sector in general for organizations. So when we look at the impact of procurement of goods and services, it's almost 50%. At the sector level. So these figures are from our sectoral analysis that was released last year of the emissions of the humanitarian sector. And when we include cash and voucher assistance in procurement, it's even 75% of the emissions. So here we only talk about carbon emissions. For individual organizations, it's usually around 40 to 60% and sometimes even going up to 75%. So it's really a key area we need to tackle if we want to make progress on climate targets. But how do we do that? So I think we will hear it in the session today. It's really about identifying key items and identifying key levers for decarbonization. And in order to do that, one methodology is lifecycle analysis to really identify where are the key impacts at an item level. So the objective of the session today is really about sharing some key findings from lifecycle analysis that have been performed in the sector so far or are currently ongoing. Also trying to understand, are there some general findings across different categories, across different products, across different LCAs that we can use? What are opportunities and also limitations of the approach? And then most importantly, how are organizations implementing these findings to either reduce their footprint or also to do market shaping activities? So with me to discuss this important topic today are Ashima Rajput. She's a computer engineer and environmental analyst specializing in LCAs and circular economy. She works at the university EPFL in Lausanne, so the Polytechnical University in Lausanne, at the Laboratory of Environment and Urban Economics LUR. And she's also one of the experts working on the calculations of a joint project between ICRC and Climate Action Accelerator that you will hear about. Then we have Sarah Joseph. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Humanitarian Logistics and Regional Development at the Kühne Logistics University based in Germany. I'm very happy to have her. She performed a number of LCAs in the sector and is really one of the experts in the humanitarian sector. And then I think many of you know Carmen Garcia Duro. She's the Sustainable Supply Chain. She's the manager of the Sustainable Supply Chain Alliance, SSCA, at the ICRC since 2020. And she, in this role, she drives initiatives in sustainable fleet management, sustainable purchasing, reducing air transport. And she was also really one of the persons developing the humanitarian carbon calculator. And then last but not least, we have Julien Pouy. He's the team lead for climate and health at UNITAID. He leads the implementation of the organization's strategy at the intersection of health and climate. And for those who do not know UNITAID, UNITAID is a grant-making agency. So they do not buy themselves, but they provide grants to, for example, launch new products, formulate new treatments. And so it's really this market shaping approach that we're interested in hearing about today. It's a slightly different approach to ICRC, so it's quite complementary. Maybe just in terms of the session flow, so we decided to have sort of two big parts. One of the more technical part where we dive into findings of some of the LCAs from Ashima and Sarah were working on. And then we have a more strategy/implementation part where we look at how our organizations using these findings and implementing them. And you'll have the opportunity to ask questions after each part. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Ashima. I'm not sure if it's, yeah, it works, perfect. Oops, sorry.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So I will be taking my time to present some results of the project that we're working on with CAA and ICRC as EPFL. The project is called Accelerating the Reduction of Environmental Impact of Humanitarian Action. It's a mouthful, but it generally means that we are trying to find ways to speed up decarbonization in humanitarian aid and or general environmental impact reduction. And the first way we're doing that is through conducting life cycle assessments. So in short, we have three very big deliverables that we're working on as part of this project. The first of them in the center being LCAs. So we have selected a few items that are key in the humanitarian supply chain that don't have working emission factors at the moment to conduct LCAs on, which will be published to be used for other organizations to determine decarbonization levers, to find out what are the actionable steps they can take and not have to do the LCAs themselves. And then the findings of our LCAs will be put into an emission factor database. And this will be published to then for other organizations to make their own carbon footprints or operated with their own tools, including the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator. And then finally, the way that we're doing our LCAs is in form of a tool, an Excel tool, which is we have set it up to conform very much to conducting LCAs for humanitarian items, creating scenario analysis and such things. So we want to publish the tool as well as like a template or a format for others to do their own LCAs, to improve upon our LCAs, to make things more granular, input their own data without having to, again, start from scratch their work. And so the general idea of all three things that we're trying to do as part of this project is to standardize the way impact reduction planning or impact measurement is done in the industry. So these are a list of our items that we're working on. The top 5 are the ones we will be mentioning as part of this presentation, but all 13 will be released at the end of this project as separate LCAs, emission factors, and tools. The emission factor database and Excel tool, by the way, will have some information from proprietary databases. So we're discussing with licensing and such things to try to make it open source as much as possible. But the main reason we chose this list is because a lot of organizations order them in large numbers. And we currently don't have working factors or information to really try to decarbonize these products or even measure their impacts properly with the context of the humanitarian supply chain. So we are mostly studying the impacts of producing, distributing, using, and then disposing these items in humanitarian context, which is not the same as Western contexts. And we want to be able to give clear conclusions on what can be done to reduce the impact of these items. Very quickly, our LCA methodology is following very main standards of the ISO 14000 family. We're using EcoInvent to model the data. We're relying mostly on secondary data that we have derived from ICRC and other humanitarian organizations. And we are studying each product in cradle to grave, which means from raw material all the way to disposal, and producing emission factors, both the entire cradle to grave and cradle to gate, which is just raw material and production in case people need that for their footprinting as well. We are analyzing based on the environmental framework, European Commission's environmental framework method, and we're measuring 2 primary things: climate change and impact on human health, which is a collection of human health categories from the EF 3.1 method. We are weighting and normalizing them and making it one score to be able to compare things against each other. And then we are also creating our own indicator for plastic leakage, because we do feel, since so many of our items are plastic, that we need to look at that. This is a look at a result of one of our LCAs in total. So we conducted our first LCA on high thermal synthetic blankets. We measured the results of many types of blankets on the basis of assumption that it lasts 5 years and it is used really, really roughly. Because in humanitarian context, when you use a blanket, you're not just using it to sleep. You use it as shelter, you use it as warmth. When it is no longer being able to be used, people make it into clothes. They use the scraps to patch up things. So we are talking about rough use, a lot of use. And the first bar of the graphs is our baseline, which is a virgin polyester blanket. Mostly with all plastic items across our study, we have seen that like 60 to 70% of the impact is coming from raw material and production of the item. So the blue and the orange parts of the bar graphs, that's just because it's plastic. That's going to be very, very consistent across most plastic items, no matter what kind of plastic it is. And the first thing that we studied to try to reduce this impact is to replace the virgin polyester with polyester made from recycled PET instead of virgin PET, which reduces around 30% impacts in climate change terms and around 12% in human health. So this is also one of the reasons we always pit climate change and human health against each other, is because the results are different. The reduction is different, but it is there. So you are able to halve your raw material impact by going from virgin to recycled PET. But overall, you see a 30% reduction. However, you have to assume that the recycled PET blanket is lasting as long as the virgin PET. If you don't assume that, and if you assume that the quality is going down a little bit, let's say half, it lasts half as long as a virgin blanket, then the impact actually goes up, because you need more blankets to satisfy the same function, right? So that's the third bar, which is towering over everybody else, meaning that just because you need more quantity of items to satisfy the 5 years that you want to give for a blanket use, you need to make sure that the quality of the recycled PET blanket is actually the same as the virgin one, or else it will go in that direction. And then finally, since the brown part, which is the end of life, is also quite significant for our product, we modeled what would happen normally, which is even if the waste is managed, it would go in, let's say, pits for open burning or landfills. And so considering an open pit burning scenario at baseline, if you switch to landfills and switch to recycled PET, then you get a combined reduction of 45% of climate change impact and 39% of human health impact. So generally, the idea as part of our LCAs is to combine many types of impact reductions across the life cycle chain to show what could be the combined reduction that can be achieved. And in most plastic items, it has to be more than one. It has to be raw material, it has to be the way that it is produced, and it has to be the way that it is disposed. Otherwise, you will have something along the lines of 30 to 40% reduction, but it can go higher if you combine multiple things. So what are the multiple things that you can combine? The first and the most significant is the use life and durability. In these graphs, we have multiple items that we are studying, all sort of showing you the breakup of their impact. Like I said before, if it's plastic, majority of the impact is coming from actually sourcing the plastic and producing the item. And so if you make it last twice as long, for example, you can assume approximately the impact will reduce about half, because the longer the product lasts, the better the life cycle impact is. And so a lot of attention needs to be paid to the quality and the durability of the item if you are relying on plastics. And of course, that counts for recycled plastic, virgin plastic, no matter what plastic it is. If you have to use plastic, we need to make sure that it is quality plastic so that it lasts a long time and the beneficiaries get a lot of use out of it. But when we are still talking about plastic, like I said earlier, substituting virgin with recycled is definitely a good way to reduce the impacts in both climate change and human health, but only if the quality and the lifespan of the item are maintained. So when we are at the design stage, when we are talking about substituting materials, it is important to design with durability in mind, to bring low carbon materials, but ensure a long product life. Then the production, which is the orange part of the graphs, obviously it's still significant, not as big as the raw material and end of life, but it goes hand in hand with the raw material production, raw material sourcing, right? So with renewable energy being used as part of the production processes, we can achieve alone by itself 8 to 10% climate change impact reduction in climate change and 3 to 5% impact reduction in human health. We are using the blankets as an example, but we have seen this across many items that are made from plastic to be a trend. However, the idea is to then combine this and better materials and a long use life to really achieve the good significant impact reduction at the end. This is an example of a study of the soap bar, where we modeled a soap bar with a plastic cling film wrap around it, a soap bar with paper packaging, and a soap bar with no packaging. So we wanted to add this as one of the key learnings to show, for example, that the perspective of the LCA is a lot about weight of the product, right? And so if the weight of the packaging is really, really minimal compared to the product, packaging itself does not move the needle quite at all, almost nowhere. So with even if you go for completely no packaging, the reduction of impact is 4% in climate change and 2% for human health, or 6 and 3%, sorry. If you go with paper, it's 4% and 2%. So plastic packaging is a problem in general, but for this perspective, it is not an impact assessment method that will bring about decarbonization of the soap bar. When it comes to transportation, which are the yellow bars in the bar graph, as long as the transport is, even if it is international, as long as it is done overseas, in maritime shipping, it is a small enough share of impact throughout the life cycle of the product that it does not come in the priority list of impact reduction or decarbonization pathways, right? However, if you use air freight, then it immediately becomes one of the bigger problems and takes up 30 to 50% of the impacts if the product is lightweight, which a lot of the items that the humanitarian supply chain is consisting of are lightweight, and a lot of the items we're studying are lightweight. So in this case, a polyester blanket modeled to go from train to the port in India. Let's say we are modeling that it was produced in India, then by sea to Europe, and then by truck to Ukraine in one scenario, let's say. Or if we replace the train with a truck, it is next to no change. But if we replace the ship with a flight, then it becomes the second highest emitter, second highest share of impact for the blanket. And then for end of life, it's a complicated and difficult topic, mostly because there's not a lot of visibility on what happens at the end of life of these products. And so to model humanitarian conditions, we want to make sure that the beneficiary countries we're looking at in Africa, in Ukraine, in Asia, we know that the waste is not managed as well as other countries. And so at baseline, if the waste is managed, if the government is doing something, if the authorities are doing something, we are assuming that the waste is sent into a pit and set on fire, right? This is obviously very toxic. It releases toxic pollutants into the air, and it has high emissions and high health risks, which is why the baseline has a huge brown bar. However, if the authorities are managing the waste still, they can send it to a landfill. But if nobody's managing anything, then we have modeled the middle bar of the graph, which is the unsanitary landfills, meaning that the waste is ending up somewhere. The landfills are not lined. They are not being created to protect the waste to prevent the waste from going into the soil. And so there is a massive reduction of impacts compared to open burning because, the fumes are not getting escaped into the air. However, it's still quite significant. And so sanitary landfills, which is a managed waste method, which authorities can take care of, where they make sure that the waste does not start to poison the earth, basically, does prevent a lot of the impact of the end of life of the blanket and most items, significantly most plastic items, to minimize the end of life impacts. However, if you see in human health, in the lower bar, just moving away from open burning wipes out 95% of the impact. So this is important for us to show how different the climate change and human health implications are for these items, because we have, carbon emissions are not the end of the story. We do have other things to concentrate on. So in short, I just wanted to repeat what we're talking about across all the products we are studying. Raw material production, end of life are majority of the impacts, almost all of the impacts. We want to focus a lot on choosing quality products or quality materials that last a long time and can fulfill the functions to the beneficiaries for longer, so that they don't need more of the item. That reduces the impact quite a bit. When you choose alternative materials and you go to the eco-design route, we have to have quality in mind and make sure that the quality is not compromised, because the same way the impact will increase if the quality decreases. Sourcing from suppliers that use renewable energy is relatively simpler to do and has a ripple effect, because your product may be improved by 10% just by renewable energy, but the suppliers, all the other products that the supplier does will also get that improvement. And so encouraging the industry towards that direction has like a industrial level implication in terms of decarbonization. And then finally, if we're creating waste, we have to figure out ways to manage it. We have to make sure that it's being managed. So waste management is really important in impact reduction pathways, but it requires study and improvements at national levels, because we can't make sweeping judgments on waste management for a product, no matter where it is going. So thank you very much for your time. We will be publishing the results of each of these items separately at the end of our project. And so please feel free to reach out to us or ask any questions that you wish after Sarah's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashima. We move straight on to Sarah.
A little shorter. So, hi, everyone. I'm just getting over being sick last week, so if my voice is a little quiet or scratchy, I'm sorry. And I wanted to talk to you today about the life cycle assessments that we've done the last around 3 years in the humanitarian sector at CHORD. And CHORD is the Center for Humanitarian Logistics and Regional Development at the Kuhn Logistics University in Hamburg.
If it's easy, you can also.
Perfect. Okay, great. So we have some examples of our projects. So I want to talk to you today about two different, you could say like two different projects we've done. So the first one, it's many projects, but we lump it into one. It's 6 different life cycle assessments. And in the end, the output of this would be a scientific paper, so like an advocacy paper. But we've also done some practitioner reports for some of these life cycle assessments, as well as WREC. The WREC final report, so the greenhouse gas emissions and waste, was included also. So we've done a life cycle assessment on health, 2 on food, 1 on fleet, and 2 on shelter. And these were end-to-end, so full supply chains, gathering data directly with humanitarian organizations, and also developing some different scenarios here. So in total, in this paper, we have around 20 different scenarios and 6 different life cycle assessments. So quite a lot of data, and yeah. But to keep it short, I will just stop there on that part. And then the second is WRM. I don't know if any of you have heard of yet of WRM, but it's an EU-funded project where we're focusing on reducing waste and the environmental impact of waste in the humanitarian sector. It's a 2-year project. We have many different partners, around 16 different partners, international consortium. And partly this is looking at life cycle assessments of bio-based products for field hospital settings in Kenya and Vietnam. And not like the LCA is not specifically focusing on Kenya and Vietnam in this way, but our focus for WRM is Kenya and Vietnam. And what's quite interesting about this project is, on one side, we're looking at the production. So the production of bio-based products. We identified some priority products: PPE, body bags, sharps containers, syringes and needles, temporary sludge bladders, and I think that's it. And then, so we're looking at the production end and some conventional waste management, incineration, open dumping, open burning, but we're also looking at less destructive methods for hazardous waste management. So disinfecting the waste and then sending it to a sanitary landfill. So those are the two different LCA topics that I will talk to you about. I will start with the advocacy one. So what you can see is all the different scenarios here. And the graph at first is a little, a lot. But what I think is important is to see the different steps. So we try to simplify it as much as possible across different sectors. So health, fleet, shelter, food. Where is there commonalities that we're finding? And what we do find, if you look at, for example, the 1.1 and 1.2, so anything without this really large blue bar, that's without air transport. And we see that the source, the production of the materials and the raw material extraction and the production before it actually reaches the humanitarian organization is really high. But if we do have air transport, so in 1.3, for example, in 3.1, so along those ones, you can see where there's air. The international supply chain is 42 to 78%. This is just looking at greenhouse gas emissions, but we have this for all the different categories. So just to simplify, we'll look at this one today. In our case here, actually air is around 70 to 80 times more greenhouse gas emission intensive than sea per ton kilometer. But what's also quite interesting is that it's around 4 to 5 times more than road. So actually sea is much less carbon intensive in this way per unit. And we talk about ton kilometer, that means a specific amount of weight traveling is a distance. And we also use the EcoInvent database. So just pointing out that these numbers, like if you look at other LCAs, it's sometimes a little lower, but it's around this, but it depends on the database. So this isn't a specific database. I'm looking also at dedicated freight. But on average, if we don't have air transport, sourcing is around 57%. So in sourcing, sorry about the terminology, I have to, we mean here the production of the raw materials and the manufacturing of the product itself. But what's also quite interesting, if you look at 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, specifically 3.2 and 3.3, these are a health kit traveling by sea, so we don't have the air here. But the red, which is the in-country supply chain, is quite large, and it's actually only traveling 700 kilometers. It's much larger than the international one, and this is due to the inefficiencies in country. So they have really big challenges with accessibility. It's a protracted crisis. And in some cases, the item needs to sit at the border, they have an internal border. It's sitting for an average of 25 or 30 days while the truck is running because they have a cold chain item. So this is like an actual situation that's happening. And it's, of course, sometimes the inefficiency is not, it's difficult to avoid, but it's also important to see how much that really drives up the emissions. And what we also find, which was quite interesting, looking at 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, this is a prepositioning. So the item is produced in China. It's sent to Malaysia, Canada, and Dubai, and then sent to Pakistan. And if you imagine that it's produced in China, it's sent to Canada and then to Pakistan. So we think about like the prepositioning in this way that actually can really create challenges as well when you're increasing the distances and the inefficiency. So also touching on then this inefficiency and the complexity. So talking about the cold chain, for example, the in-country. So when you have these complexities, that makes it even more challenging. And this is in no way a judgment from our end. We're just presenting the data and we understand that this is the real situation. And I think that's important than having the data on the real situation here. And then when we look at the end of life, so it's the green part, this almost all of the emissions from the end of life are coming from open burning and incineration, which is touching also on what Ashik said there. We have for all the different impact categories, but just showing you carbon emissions, but in general, kind of similar things are happening for the other categories as well, similar conclusions. stay tuned for the advocacy paper published circa 3 years from now. But we do have the practitioner reports are out and the REC report. So, yeah. And then the second one, the WORM project, we're looking at medical products for humanitarian field hospital settings. And this is 3 different LCAs. So firstly, looking at the production of the items. Here's the items here, as well as common waste treatment, and looking at, is there a difference when you have a bio-based versus a conventional? What's the impact of waste treatment? And these are the common methods here. And in this case, it's not considered hazardous waste just for our LCA in the second one. But when we look at the third one, this is all the waste is considered hazardous waste, and we look at what is the option, what is the impact of switching to different methods. So incineration is the common method, but what about autoclaving and sanitary landfill, chemical disinfection and sanitary landfill, or microwaving? And this was based on insights from our project partner in Kenya, who visited health facilities and looked at what possible options were. What we see in terms of production, this is just the example for the face mask, but all of the WORM deliverables are on our website. The LCAs are also available. This particular LCA, we have for all of the products, we also did some sensitivity analysis, very long. But what we see actually, the bio-based one outperforms the conventional. Typically in here, the conventional is made of a plastic and the bio-based is made of a starch-based material. So they're relatively aligned, but the bio-based one performs worse in terms of freshwater ecotoxicity and eutrophication. This is generalized as water pollution, and this is actually due to the high use of fertilizers and pesticides in the agricultural production phase. So it's kind of interesting to think about. I mean, I did my PhD on food supply chains, and this, I could say, this came out already before. So we kind of had an idea that this would happen. And then we tested, okay, what if it's organically produced, just as a thought experiment, and the footprint went significantly down. Yeah. The industrialized food system and producing food is a challenge, and that would be good to try to shift to better ways, not just for food, but also for products like this. So this is important to keep in mind. And then when we look at waste treatment, in the interest of time, actually, I'm just going to jump to the next one, because I think this one is quite interesting. So if we look at alternative methods, and you see the different the environmental impact categories here, incineration is almost always way higher than the other methods. And then you have autoclaving is the first one, then chemical disinfection and microwaving, and then sanitary landfill is the little gray box on the top. So you see these alternative methods actually do significantly reduce the footprint. On the other hand, our project partner is also working on actually how can you implement it? Is it possible? And so we can show this with the LCA that this could be a result, but actually implementing it in practice is quite challenging. So if we try to summarize as concise as possible, what should humanitarian organizations, where should they focus? So we see that product and supplier choice, which are 2 different things, you could say, like the product evaluation and how the product is made, but also how does a supplier produce the product? This is a key area, and this is contributing to around half. We also did an assessment on how sustainability is systematically embedded in procurement procedures across humanitarian organizations. And we interviewed around 20 organizations, and it's not systematic. It's very much when it's possible, but this, of course, has to do with many factors. But we also see procurement as a gatekeeper to the rest of the supply chain. So waste management is also key, but designing products and producing products so that they can last, but also be repaired is really key. And we see procurement as a gatekeeper for the rest of the supply chain. And what materials are used and where it is how the item is produced, and what materials are used is more important than where. So we talk about purely environmental sustainability. Localization is not necessarily always the best. There's other benefits for localization for social or economic, but that's not always in terms of environmental safety the best. And then the second one is planning, and planning efficiently. So what we saw in the 6 case studies I showed you before, the items move on average more than 15,000 kilometers and are stored for 190 days before they reach their destination. It might not be possible to change that, but I think it's interesting to note, really, that's a lot. It's not really that different than the commercial sector that's also happening, but is it possible to reduce this? Because this does make a difference, and I think you touched on this before. You will touch on that. So, and as well, the air transport is obviously a really big issue. Ashima also touched on, so anticipatory planning, pre-positioning, but pre-positioning as close as possible to try to reduce the need for air transport, so when the disaster happens. And complexities, accessibility, cold chain, for example, they should be identified and prioritized when possible. And that would be it for me.
So thanks, Ashima and Sarah. We'll have, so you can start thinking about your questions. I'll start with one or two questions first, and then I'll give the floor to you and people online. And those that are joining us online, please don't hesitate to add your questions to the chat, and we'll read them out. So super interesting. I thought it was also interesting to see basically, you know, in the project that Ashima is working on with ICRC and Climate Action Accelerator, it's more the focus on the item itself. Whereas on the one analysis that Sarah shared, it was also, you know, looking at the really the whole supply chain with where is the item stored, what is the transport, which was another element that was quite interesting, I thought. I think we can see that quite significant reductions are actually possible. When we look at the data, it is actually possible to significantly reduce the like be it the carbon, environmental, human health impact of items. The big question is, yeah, how are we doing that in practice? We get there in the second part, but I think it's sort of reassuring in a way that there is actually a lot of potential there. It was also interesting to see that there's actually across different types of product, there are some general outcomes that are valid across the different items that were analyzed. So the impact of the raw material, the production stage, also for both the end of life. And I think what also came clearly out is the importance of quality and the lifespan of an item. And basically, you know, the best reduction is to plan efficiently and avoid waste. And that's the most important thing to do to reduce the impact. So I wanted to ask a question regarding the indicators that were used, because we saw in the two projects there were different indicators, but impact categories is the right term to use, impact categories used. So I wanted to ask both of you, what was the rationale behind choosing these indicators? And maybe Ashima, you want to start and answer.
Okay, so I think we're both using the same set of impact categories, which is for the European Commission's environmental footprint method, but it's a lot. There's like 16 impact categories in there. And so in the essence, we wanted to have more LCAs and less number of categories to be able to get out more emission factors, to get out more studies on more items, right? So we chose two groups, first being climate change, which only contains one category, and the second being human health, which we found very relevant to the humanitarian context, right? So what we are doing is choosing human health, which is a over category with some sub indicators in there, weighting them according to the EF 3.1 method, and then normalizing them for the population of the world, for example, per person, to make a score as a mirror image to the climate change, to show how much different the impact assessments may be against climate change. So that we're not only thinking about carbon footprints when we're talking about impact reduction. But yeah, that's where we wanted to stop for the timing for our projects, because we felt that it was important to do more items, and to do more items we needed to reduce from the original 16 list. But yeah, impact on human health, we thought it was very straightforwardly related to the humanitarian industry. Sarah?
Yeah, we followed like a bit of a similar thing. So we normalized the results, not to the average emissions per world citizen, but to planetary boundaries. There's was a study that came out in, I think it was 2020, two different studies, where they converted the EF 3.1 impact categories to the planetary boundaries that were developed by the Swedish Research Institute. So I don't know if you're familiar with the planetary boundaries, but that's the point in which Earth can no longer naturally regenerate. And so they converted to this, and we normalized it to the allotment per person per year of this planetary boundary. And then you can see how high the different categories are. And the Sala is the author for this one, and it's quite interesting paper. I think they do it to the European food supply of how far it's reaching planetary boundaries. And then the ones that are higher is the ones that we pull out.
Thank you. I have one, maybe just quickly, if you could also talk about some of the limitations of life cycle analysis. You know, of course, it's super interesting to have the data and, you know, the outputs, but, you know, what are some limitations of this type of methodology? Maybe you want to continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's very data intensive. It's not a super complicated methodology in terms of like how to do it. It's just so much data and so many steps, and that's where it gets complicated. I also think a limitation of LCAs, it's quite static. And if you had a chance to look at the REC report, and we had really great collaboration with one on this one, we combined LCA and system dynamics. So we actually looked at the full carbon emissions in a systems perspective of the disaster response. And that was really interesting. But as you can imagine, even more data intensive. So that's kind of a limitation, is the data, but also this staticness of LCA. So you just get a snapshot. And so you always have to take it as, yeah, make sure that it's actually reflecting reality.
You want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just also say that the different impact categories have different levels of scale. So climate change obviously is global, but if you're talking about nature-based categories, you're very much localizing the impact to where the item is being grown or the item is being disposed. So a limitation of our LCA results is very much that either we choose to make it very standard and global, or we choose to make it very specifically local. We can't do both at the same time. So that would be my contribution there.
You want to add anything, Julian?
No, I mean, yes.
Just because I saw you nodding a lot. I was like, maybe you want to add
many
something.
of the insights have been shared really kind of equal. Also, the work we've been doing in context of study, I'll share a few more insights about that study. But the issue around nature and biodiversity tends to be focusing at both ends of product value chains, really upstream and eventually more downstream end of life. I think that's one of the key challenge to address. But there's a trade-off, obviously, that needs to be made.
Yeah, and then it's kind of difficult to make the choice between the different trade-offs. Okay, there's a few questions online, but I'll take maybe first one question from the audience if there is one. Otherwise, yeah, please go ahead.
I have a comment and a question. First of all, thank you so much for this. We just started implementing a project in Yemen. I'm from Canada, but we're implementing in Yemen. And we're looking at the use of diesel power and comparing that with solar power on transportation refrigeration units for cold chain. So my question is really, first of all, it's your challenges in collecting data on scope 3 emissions, if you could speak to that. And I wanted to thank you also for the data we said about 25 to 30 days sometimes the trucks are running per cold chain. This is absolutely incredible because I think it really speaks to the value proposition that we have for our project. So
yeah, I could maybe talk on that because actually that is Yemen. That's the country that in that supply chain is Yemen.
oh,
And it's a health supply. It's a kit with a cold chain item.
okay.
And we modeled, it's mostly diesel generators or the refrigerated trucks.
Okay.
But we also looked at if it's by solar, what's the impact in this case? And it was interesting because the solar definitely reduced the impact, but actually just trying to figure out a way to not make it sit so long at all the different stops had a bigger impact in the end.
Yes.
But it's super, and I think that's a super complicated. It's, if you could choose a more complicated in-country supply chain, I'm not sure if you so that one was very complicated. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I saw you raise your hand. I'll just take one question from the chat because it actually fits with the question of transport. So the question is, we changed transport for medication from sea to air to reduce the risk of high temperature variations and keep the quality of medication. What can you suggest as a better solution?
So I'll just go first quickly. There's a separate project I'm working on with shipping containers that come with native insulation to modulate the temperature changes. And so the quick answer to a problem like this, which is a very real problem, is innovative, new innovations that have come out that, I mean, you could actually insulate the container, you could create cold boxes that have insulation that don't need, that will prevent the temperature modulation. But containers have started to come into the supply chain, which work with native insulation that don't need additional like polyurethane packing or anything that can prevent this modulation. So I would very much recommend reaching out for more information. However, it exists, but the problem is very real, I think. Do you have anything to add? No, okay, thank you.
Please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alexander from STC. I'm wondering, like on one of the first slides, you have shown that I think cash and voucher assistance is estimated to make up to 30% of greenhouse gas emission, which seems to be, like just from my feeling, very high. Given that, usually cash and voucher assistance is spent locally and so on. I'm just wondering if you can say a few words about it. Why is it that high, or?
Yeah, I leave it to someone. Do you want me to start? Yeah. So maybe because this analysis was performed by Climate Action Accelerator with the input of an external consultant. And it's really, I think we have to take.
I'm just going to repeat the question for the online audience.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'll repeat it. So the question was in some of the initial slides, it was shown that cash and voucher assistance is around 30% of the sector-wide carbon footprint. And so the question is, this seems quite high. So why? What is the reason behind it? So I think we really need to take these figures with some caution. They are based on assumptions and hypotheses that were taken. Right now, organizations are actually using different types of methodologies to account for emissions from cash and voucher, but currently there is no sort of aligned sector-wide methodology to account for them. I think what we know is that the volume of cash and voucher assistance is quite high and has been increasing in the last years. But yeah, just to say, it's really based on assumptions, the figures.
If I can complement, you have different kind of methodologies that you are saying. For example, I mean, when you give cash, it's because there is a minimum basket, it's called minimum expenditure basket per country. So you give 100 euros to Nigeria, for a family, and this means this. So there is one study, Action Against Hunger, did a study trying to take that minimum expenditure basket, which it makes completely sense, trying to understand how that repercutes on the cost. But because there you have services, you can have a school for the kids, but you can have also a tarpaulin that is purchased locally, which the quality may not be that good. So you have a mix of everything. So that is the way we should go. They Action Against Hunger, they actually push a lot for food because as they distribute, they distribute for them to buy to purchase food, and actually the emission factors were even higher than the general ones. So it is really something very complicated. It is something that is making sense. We are giving cash because it's the people spend it in what they actually need, but there is a huge impact. But we cannot do that much. So it's voucher is a different thing. You can do much more with voucher, but I don't know other organizations. For example, in ICRC, voucher is 5% of what we account in 100% for cash. So 5% is peanuts. So yeah.
I just think like it's a bit tricky the message you send with this kind of figures. If it's just put out there like this, because it's looked like cash and voucher assistance is bad for the environment, and so. I mean, just saying. Thank you very much for the super interesting presentation.
Maybe just to quickly reply, I don't think that we're saying it's per se good or bad. There's no judgment on the type of response. It's just, I think the only thing that we're saying is we also need to account for cash and voucher assistance. We cannot leave it out of the footprint calculation because it basically replaces, instead of ICRC buying essential household items, which would appear in the footprint, they're giving cash to people that are also buying something. And so there are also emissions from the goods that the beneficiaries are buying. So if we were not to account for in the carbon footprint, we would basically artificially reduce the footprint. So I think it's important to know that it's not a value statement about, you know, this type of response is better than another. We're not in a position to do that, but just to say, if you do it, then you should also account for in your carbon accounting. So I just wanted to clarify that. We take one last quick questions from the chat. It's about the manufacturing locations. So the question is, I'm wondering which manufacturing locations you considered in the analysis. So that's for Ashima. Were you able to compare various locations to conclude anything about local production versus international production and transporting items overseas?
Yes, so we have a list of about 13 products that we're doing LCAs on. A few of them, most of them are sourced internationally, which means they're ordered all from one location when it comes to ICRC or any one organization, stocked somewhere or sent somewhere to a regional distribution center through an international supply chain. In this case, the location and the supply chain is pretty straightforward. The countries are usually India, China, things that are cost effective, but also easier to source out. And then there are certain items like soap, like mattresses that are bought locally wherever the humanitarian intervention is taking place. They are not internationally shipped, mostly because they're very heavy duty, like mattresses, or because it's easier, more straightforward to buy them locally as and when needed. And so for these things, we are modeling local production, local or just local sourcing, and then local delivery, no international shipping. So we are working with both scenarios. However, in terms of like the conclusions of what we found, is relating to the production processes. It's relating to even if you are shipping something from overseas, like if you get the blankets from India as opposed to from Kenya locally or something else, really what matters is the material that is being used and then the energy mix of where it's being produced, which is obviously why a country with a better energy mix, a more renewable or a cleaner energy mix will reduce the production emissions or the production impact. But at the same time, if that country has a horrible disposal management or waste management situation, things get balanced back out. And so, yeah, that's basically what we found. It really depends. However, yeah, it's a matter of international or local supply chain. We are trying to model both for as a group. However, it really depends on the product. But yes, renewable energy really helps.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if it works. Otherwise, I'll do it for you. Okay, so we move on to the second part, which is more about the strategic questions and you know, how do organizations actually implement results? And I'll hand over to Carmen.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I put here the carbon accounting results of 2022, and as you can see, it actually rationates what she was showing before for the sector. Okay, you can actually see that more than 60% is on the items that we procure and we distribute. Then you have the financial assistance, and then you have also the use of the distributed products. For example, this is the carbon that in some areas in Ukraine we were giving. Okay, so but you can really see that one of the biggest emissions in ICRC is coming from the items that we are procuring. That's why I will start there. Can you click? No, no. Okay. So again, and I think it's super important that this is, you know, this I take it online. So it's, you know, it's kind of a summary of what they have been saying, which is actually is not new. It's old. We knew from the past that actually the main problem is in the manufacturing, the raw material, which is 60 to 70%. So I'm doing a small summary here. Then you have the energy source, which is 10 to 15%, which, for example, for today in ICRC, for the main items, okay, the most critical items, the EHIs, that we distribute, we have started to do to put in our selection table. We started as a pilot last year, and we wanted to put it globally this year. if the company is having renewable energy. And then depending on that, trying to see how we can actually give a bit of more points in the selection table in order to really push in that direction, okay? Then again, transport, as we said, sea, land is quite small. Packaging, of course, it has an impact, but it's quite small. And as Shima said, the packaging is there to actually keep our items safe. So I think we need to be careful of this, because many people have started taking the plastic outside of many of the items, and actually we don't understand that maybe it's actually important to have it there, because the problem is not the packaging. That's what we see is actually what is behind. But then what is important is the transport by air, okay? And this is, as they say, this 30 to 50%. So if, go, please. Okay, so from my side, what I would like to really focus on is we are working on sustainable specifications. But if you have sustainable specifications, but at the end you are giving that to the supplier, but at the end you are not making sure that that's what actually they are implementing, they're doing nothing, okay? So that is why, and I think with the work that has been done with the life cycle analysis is so important to make sure that we don't have the highest quality. No, we have the quality that we are paying for and we are asking for. Okay, so this is, and the lifespan is super, super important, together with the sustainable specifications, what is related to have eco-design products and things like this. And then it was a bit touched by one of you is, I mean, in ICRC, we start looking at different things, and it was, how can we reduce the air? Okay, it's always better, and we have cases where they put train instead of road, which is super nice, but that's not really where the impact is. The impact is air. And this is something that is long thing to start putting it in place, is how we can start planning better, okay? As you can imagine, the planning can be very complicated in the humanitarian sector. ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, the Red Cross works in conflicts, which then emergencies are popping up all the time. And even though we can really plan, I mean, the first 6 months may not be the easiest to plan, that's for sure, that is an emergency, but after that, they can plan. Therefore, making sure that our requesters, they forecast, they do demand planning, this will really reduce not only the air, but it will also reduce the time that the goods stays in the warehouse, that maybe those items will get expired because they were asked, they arrived late, and then we will need to throw them away, and we need to produce them again. So this forecasting and demand planning, which we call it in general planning, is super key when we talk about, environmentally supply chains in general, okay? I will focus in some of the EHIs that ICRC has worked on. I think the tarpaulin, many people knows already. We did a project where at the end, we have now a tarpaulin that has 14% less of weight. So we continue to have plastic, even if we try with other material. It needs to be plastic because actually plastic is a super good material. Okay, so it continues to be plastic. We have doubled the lifespan by, by the strength, the UV resistance. So at the end, the only difference is stronger, but 14% less of weight. Okay. Then we have worked on the hygienic parcel with eco-friendly materials, where it has, and I will go a bit more in details, but it has reduced the volume of the item 40%. Okay, and it has reduced the plastic. And I want to make, before I go into the details, in ICRC, for example, this item, the hygienic parcel, we purchase globally, for some areas, but then in some areas we also purchase locally or regionally, okay? So now what I will talk is about the regional, the global one, that is the one that we have worked on, okay? And now what we are trying to do is how we can actually see if those same specifications can be changed at the regional level, which it may not be that simple, okay? So for example, in the hygienic parcel, the dishwashing liquid, instead of having normal dishwashing liquid, is concentrated, okay, which then reduce the volume twice. I mean, it reduced by half, to reduce the plastic by half, but at the end, the person receives the same, okay? We did a pilot of solid shampoo, to replace the liquid shampoo. The towels are natural, the colors are natural, the toothpaste, not the toothpaste, the toothbrush, and now it's no bamboo, but it's, because it needs to be strong, so it's half plastic have, and I don't remember now the other, that is a biomaterial, okay? So because at the end, we need to have items that they can last, okay? We have done all that, and as I said, it's 40% of reduction. Then we have the solar lamp, where you can see also the old solar lamp that we were giving, the red one, and the new one, okay? And again, we have really focused on higher durability. So now this will be, I mean, in the past it was already repairable. Now it's even more repairable, but it's really on the durability. We have changed the type of batteries that we use to make sure that they last longer, that they can, you know, that if one of the LEDs pops out, it will continue to give light. So many different things have been taken into account. For sure, we didn't do that alone. We have UNHCR, we have been working with UNHCR, with IFRC. So this, there is a lot of work with other organizations, which I think is super important. But again, what I want to focus is only what is the impact. If you just reduce the impact by weight and volume, you are reducing the energy that we use in the production and in the material, because you use less material. Then you use less transport because the volume is less. So that also reduces, okay? And less waste generated because many of the items will at the end be waste. After 6 months, after 2 years, they will become waste. So then you will have less waste. And I'm bringing this point because many times we just go into, let's have recycled items, let's have, but then we lost this perspective of, you know, what we want is that people can use it for the longest as they can, you know? And all this without no higher cost. And at least in ICRC, we cannot pay more for more sustainable items today. Well, we hope one day we will, but so we have been focusing on really, you know, trying to not increase the price, because that today will mean that we distribute less to less people. Then we did a work which I think it was quite interesting, not only because of the results, but actually making people aware that what we were working on. And it was, we look at all the items that we distribute in ICRC, and we try to kind of came with the most critical ones. It was a list of 200 items. And from those 200 items, we try to ask, you know, the people who are ordering, the people who are purchasing, saying, please think out of the box and come with a solution. Say, you know, I believe this could help. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. Then we went to a feasibility of study of those solutions, where we clean up a lot, because many of them, they were not feasible. Maybe many of them, they were super expensive, so we couldn't do. But I just want to bring an example, which it was changing rice, okay? So rice in ICRC is a big, you know, is one of the items that has more impact. So we wanted to see what can we do? Okay, we are investigating with WFP today about sustainable rice platform, but this is something that is not that simple, okay? And we said, what can be done? And then we have some people saying, can we change it for another cereal? We're like, wow. So the nutritionists say, yes, but actually it will be better for the environment, for the nutritional value. And then like this, we start discussing and actually replacing it, and it can be for sorghum, it can be for millet, you know, which in many countries, for example, in Africa, they are actually produced locally. So it's, you know, it has a lot of added value. Pop-up. So, and of course, implementation is not that simple. That popped up a year and a half ago. The first implementation was 3 months ago. So, you know, it's not all beautiful what I'm saying here. But then at the end, it was, I think, 3 months ago, in Sudan, they managed to change, you know, their rice that they were distributing with sorghum. This reduced 90% the emission factors, only in that, okay? And it reduced the cost by 30%. I'm not saying it's possible everywhere, because that may not be possible everywhere. You know, we tried in Mali, and now they're thinking for the next purchase to see if they can do with millet 20%. So, you know, it may not be that simple, but I think, you know, sometimes we, you know, we go into really this eco, which it may be good. We did the tarpaulin, it sounds very good, you know, but many other things can be done. But we need to make the people thinking out of the box to see what is feasible. Then, and this is key, and it takes a lot of time, is the involvement of many stakeholders. The involvement of all the stakeholders is key, because logistics or procurement cannot do anything alone without the requesters, without the beneficiaries, but also involving other organizations, because at the end, when we purchase, in many cases, we go to the same suppliers. So it's actually key to really to work with everyone, universities and everyone. And then I was asked, should we do life cycle analysis for everything? And I was like, no, for sure not, I mean, life cycle analysis we did for example, for the eco-design tarpaulin. Now we are in the project with Ashima on the CAA, on what she was telling. But for example, all the examples that I just shared, there is no life cycle analysis behind. What is helping us now with the life cycle analysis that she's doing is that then we will be able to actually prove the reductions. Because now, if you tell me what are the reductions between this solar lamp and the other one, I have no clue. I cannot tell you 20%. I can tell you the reduction in volume, that's it. But, then we, of course, life cycle analysis like this can give us better data driving, can give us able to prove the reductions, and maybe sometimes identify areas of improvement, but it's not, it may not be only that, because I do believe that, and it's huge, and it's very nice that the work that they are doing, because they are actually supporting what we have been already saying for some time. So it's actually very important that this is happening, but we don't need to have it for everything, okay? And then the last part that I wanted to say is, I believe, and I think now less and less many organizations, are starting, which is key. But sometimes but we need to do carbon accounting first. No, maybe just focus on the highest spends. I mean, if you do carbon accounting, it's even better. But just focusing on what you spend the most, just focusing on on the things that you are working with manufacturers that you maybe are. They have a good relationship. It could make big difference, okay? And of course, prioritize categories with a high impact, which is, I mean, the durability is key, as it was shown before. So I think that is very important. And please start the conversation with all the stakeholders. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Carmen.
Great. It's difficult to go after you, Carmen. Hopefully that direction. Okay. So my turn now. So eventually, as for the presentation, I will aim to do two things eventually, just to share a few insights about the study we've been doing about 2 years ago, and also share a bit about current thinking as to how LCA-based type of information can be leveraged in context of market shaping intervention. But before I do that, maybe let me share a few things about UNITAID, because UNITAID might not be familiar to all of you, and market shaping might sound very abstract as well. So I'll try to be as concrete as possible. So we are a global health agency. We're hosted under the WHO. We work in the space of infectious diseases, namely here HIV, TB, and malaria. We've been sort of stretching our mandate towards maternal and child health over the past 2 years. We also worked on global pandemics and global health emergencies, and very practically speaking, we're an organization that works on product introduction for LMICs through market shaping interventions. So one could define market shaping intervention as a set of intervention that aims to remove market barriers, the barriers that are preventing essential life-saving product from reaching the people and the population that need them the most. But very practically speaking, market shaping might involve working on studies and generating evidence, can span a wide range of studies, from clinical trial to field trial to operational research, with the aim again to generate evidence around efficacy, safety, delivery care model as well, to make sure they are really fully adapted to LMICs, where we know actually these are low-resourced and highly decentralized settings. Our aim is really through the market shaping dimension to try to work with ecosystem partners with a view to advancing those products to the markets, and at back end, hopefully those products will be taken up by international agencies, countries as well, with a view to again fostering widespread adoption. We do have a climate and health strategy, and again, because we are kind of a product introduction driven organization, our climate and health strategy really centers or hinges on the concept we've been developing, or framework, I would say, that we've been developing, that we summarize as a climate smart product framework. And our aim here is to work on mitigation dimension, making sure also the product that we work on do have significant health value, but also contribute to lowering footprint of those products, including their supply chains. We're also very keen on working on adaptation. So, and I'll show you as to how we could be using the LCA type of approach to also look at the risks dimension. And when we speak about mitigation, we would like to work both on, let's say, resilience of existing product and supply chains, resilience to extreme heat, I think it's been alluding to at some point, but also resilience of the supply chain, which happens also to be in the space where we are very globalized, very highly concentrated supply chains that depends on a subset of country when it comes to really to supply and manufacturing. Also, we'd like to take a very forward-looking approach to product, but like also make sure the future product and the future product development will be addressing and responding to climate change-induced vulnerabilities. And the last angle of approach, actually, we do believe that because adaptation and climate risk translating very differently at different regions, with different population, different settings, it's pretty important so to have this local adaptation component in the back of our mind as we think about figuring out as to how we should go about climate smart product. Here. So the study I wanted to share. So let me share a few highlights about the study. So we've been looking at 10 health products that are essential product to our space. I think they're nicely complement the product that you've been hearing about. We've been looking at medicines. We've been looking at 5 different medicines spanning HIV prevention, treatment, TB, and malaria. We also looked at postpartum hemorrhage type of medicine. It's stable carbetocin. We've looked at diagnostic because testing is very central to our let's say our product portfolio. We've looked at 3 different types of tests: the rapid test, the single-use rapid test, the point-of-care tests are more adapted to decentralized settings. We've looked at also the very large PCR-based diagnostic platform that oftentimes being operating in large scale or at least central hospitals. We looked at mosquito nets, one category of mosquito net, the last version, well, the last, let's say, generation of mosquito net, dual AI mosquito nets. And lastly, we've looked at medical oxygen. And here for medical oxygen, we just looked at medical oxygen with the PSA plants or pressure swing absorption plants. We've really taken a life cycle approach. Of course, we've been centering our work on carbon emissions, but also we wanted to stretch ourselves towards nature impact or other environmental impact. We looked at the different impact categories that I think Sarah and Yashima were speaking about. I would say one of the novel components of that study was really also to look at the flip side, not only look at the impact, but also the risks that the supply chains and the product themselves might be exposed to in the context of environmental threats, and especially in the context of climate and climate change. And the last dimension of the study, we really looked at the footprint and the risk of specific products throughout the entire life cycle. But we also been doing a scaling analysis with a view to looking at market level, what are the impacts of those products. So we've not looked at the single or the per unit carbon footprint of one given product, but we looked at the market scale, the amount of emissions that might be at stake. Because again, we work on product, but we have this sort of a market shaping dimension. The reason why we've been doing this work, first of all, I think the LCA and the type of evidence that we were looking for was not really existing, and we wanted to do our homework and understand what we were talking about. It's been very foundational in the way we've been articulating our strategy. It's been very foundational in the way actually we're looking at adding this new lens to our product introduction work. We've been looking at also with a view to be able to drive action at some point and be able to be as much as possible solution oriented. So as part of the work, we've looked at solution and levers that could be harnessed, and we've looked at I would say a preliminary feasibility also of some of those solutions. And last but not least, we see this as a really continuous learning journey, a big journey, where actually building the evidence, contributing the evidence also as a public good is very important, so that again, an ecosystem approach is being taken on by everyone. So a few words about, a few insights from our studies. Assuming, where is it working? Maybe you can click. So a few insights, just 5 insights from our study. I think I will be more or less repeating a few of the findings, but for me, I'll try to put them a bit differently. The first findings we've been making is around the medicine. So we've looked at 5 different medicines, and one, let's say, findings that we found that is a cross-cutting finding across all of them is actually the medicines carbon intensity is very high, which might sound very counterintuitive because we're speaking about oftentimes a pill or an injection So it's about, let's say, a low quantity and not really bulkier product, but eventually if you start looking at the carbon emission associated to the medicines, it can be very significant. And this is mostly explained by the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. That is really the active ingredient within each and every of the medicines. And here you see a few numbers. I've been comparing, just for illustration purposes, I've been comparing the carbon intensity of the different APIs that are compounded in the DTG-based regimen, which is the first line HIV regimen that has been taken by 20 million people globally. And as you can see on the carbon intensity line, the carbon intensity is really, really high. So for 1 kg of API, you can go up to close to 700 kg of CO2. And if you compare that to plastic, 1 kg of plastic ranges from 1 to 5, let's say, kg of CO2. So it's at least 200 times or close to 200 times. And for some other medicines, who are very complicated medicines that require multiple chemical synthesis in the way they are being manufactured, it can go even to 2,000 tons of CO2. So the carbon intensity associated to medicines is, again, not really something that we sort of think about from the outset. The next finding is more around things that I think Yashima, Carmen, and Sarah have been already pointing towards too. It's about the carbon footprint of the product that's really concentrated on the upstream manufacturing, and this is largely due to raw material manufacturing and finished product manufacturing. And we tend to see this as, and you can see basically how the footprint distributes across different steps of the value chain. And for medicine specifically, we know manufacturing is a key issue, and we will do a bit double click, I would say, on what manufacturing entails. So we've been going all the way back up in the supply chain to try to unpack the emissions that are associated to raw materials, starting materials, API manufacturing, and finished product manufacturing. Because in the supply chain, in real-world supply chains, the emissions distribute across a wide variety of different manufacturers and suppliers. So it's not like we can engage with one single manufacturer. Oftentimes we engage with the finished product manufacturer, but if you go all the way back up in the supply chain, very upstream, you land across a very, I would say, different ecosystem of suppliers. The third finding I wanted to share is about nature impact. I think we touched on that, and the fact that nature impact at large, they really tend to concentrate at both ends of the supply chain, and this is either linked to raw material, and oftentimes raw material is associated to mining, agriculture, petrochemical, where there's huge, let's say, energy consumptions associated to manufacturing of those materials. It's also linked to the finished product manufacturing, and in the context of health product like diagnostic or medicines, again, there's a huge amount of energy that are being used there, and oftentimes these are energy uses that are really building on fossil fuel energies. And then on downstream impact, I think it was mentioned that end of life is a major issue. We've looked at malaria bed net and the amount of plastics that is out there being either incinerated or put in landfill, whether managed or unmanaged. The amount of plastic that is at stake is pretty important as well. And of course, those impacts tend to concentrate in regions where actually they're more sensitive to climate change, and also they're probably the least equipped to deal with environmental challenges. The third finding is around the risks, and I've picked one example from the report that is it's an anti-malarial drug. It's called artemisinin-based combination therapy, so ACT in short. And if you look at that particular drug, how it's been manufactured, you take a life cycle approach and look at the different vulnerabilities that this treatment is exposed to. It's quite massive. The journey of that drug starts in India, where Artemisia annua, the plant, is cultivated. This plant is highly sensitive to drought and severe or extreme heat conditions. What the impact on that is actually it can reduce the crop yield, it can reduce the active ingredient concentration within the plant itself. And then this plant is combined together with a synthetic molecule, so a chemical drug that is manufactured in India. And if you look at where those manufacturers are situated, they're located in hubs that are very close to the seaside. And if you look at climate projections, you realize actually those manufacturing are largely exposed to submarine and sea level rise, basically. So again, step one, upstream material really exposed to climate disruptions, extreme heat. Then when you look at, again, manufacturing, again, another category of exposure. It's probably longer term, but when you look at manufacturing infrastructure, longer term is not so longer term. And then if you follow the journey ends with the shipment, of course, of the drug and the fact that this drug is being sent over to many African countries, and the supply chain eventually is exposed to a number of disruptions, be it from extreme heat to climate disruption into severe extreme event. And we know this drug is not really heat stable as well. So there's one chemical component that makes the drug not so heat stable. So just one drug throughout the supply chain is exposed to a number of vulnerabilities. And the climate equation, I would say, or the climate scenario, not really part of the equation at different steps of the value chain. Again. And the last finding I wanted to share is really about decarbonization. I think it was alluded to, but we've been really double-clicking and deep diving on decarbonization. We've been doing quite extensive analysis on feasibility of decarbonization. And for the 10 products, we've been able to demonstrate that a significant portion of the emissions could be abated for net zero plus to patients, basically. So since we are an organization that really focuses on equitable access and work for LMICs, that findings was very central. And as we speak today, this is an important findings that we are willing to take forward and would like to use as a basis to engage with manufacturer. And I'll speak to that in a moment. I will not go through the crazy, scary graph, but happy to take a question on that. So the last thing is just my ending note. So I wanted to end on the journey we've been decided to advance as part of our climate and strategy is around, how we can advance the decarbonization of the HIV first line treatment with a view to making this as a test case and eventually as a potential blueprint for other medicine decarbonization. So as I mentioned, basically we did this what we call outside in LCA. So at the time when we did this analysis, we haven't reached out to any manufacturers. So we've been really leveraging secondary data, non-monetary data, secondary data from the literature, be it from patient or studies available, with a view to be able to drive those findings. What we found after that study is actually it was another logical next step, which was really to engage a manufacturer, again, to pressure test our assumptions and our results with the real world, let's say, supply chain scenarios, hear back on the suppliers. Yes, I'll keep going. And on top of that, we've been doing a little bit of extensive market analysis also to understand a bit some of the challenges the manufacturers have been doing. And today, as we speak, we're in the process of shaping up an investment with a view to supporting decarbonization of that medicine. And this, looking at the entire, let's say, levers we have as a market shaping organizations, working with manufacturers, providing technical support, financial support, and assistance to help them decarbonize their production, working with procurement agencies so that they start nesting climate consideration into their procurement process, working with financiers so that they're able to kick in at some point, because some of the decarbonization tools will need additional funding to be able to move the needle, working with regulators. Anytime we're speaking about modifying productions, you need to submit product variation to regulators. They need to validate, again, those things. Working with patient populations, the demand for low carbon products, it's not yet there. How can we incentivize, or how can you raise the awareness of patient populations so that they demand low carbon version of their product? And last but not least, also working with innovators, because product adaptation will be able to probably answer part of the problems going forward. If you think about the next generation of HIV treatment in different formats, for example, if you think about long-acting formulation. So I'll probably stop here. I didn't take any other question. It was long.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's quite interesting to see, I think you both were quite smart about the way for which items to choose or not to choose during LCAs. So, Julien said basically there was no data, at least publicly available. So, you had to go for it, had to do your own analysis. And I think it's actually great, and kudos for that. You published the results. So, please, feel free to download the study. It's available online. I think it's really good practice. ICRC did the same with the tarpaulin example. It's all publicly available data. I think this is also one element that we see a lot of LCA. We know some organizations did LCAs, but it's not there. They don't share the results. One quick question, because I want to take a few questions from the audience and online, but just one follow-up question for both of you, and I'll let Carmen answer first. What are the key barriers to actually implement the changes?
That's a very important question. because actually, and I'm super honest, I will, like the tarpaulin project, we finalized it when? It was more than a year ago. We didn't put it in place. Yeah, but the final was at the end 2023. So it's a year and some months. We did not manage. Today, ICRC is not giving the eco-design tarpaulin. And I can explain why. Because actually, we have frame agreements, okay? And when we work with suppliers, I mean, I mentioned that from the beginning, we are always working with suppliers in order to make these changes. But then you cannot just, we offer the possibility to work. Some of them, they say they work with you, but then what you cannot say after is like, okay, you don't have the product, I don't buy from you, so I only buy from this guy. So today, what has happened from, end of 2023, December 2023 up to today, is trying, because we have a frame agreement, as I mentioned, with I think it's 2 or 3 different suppliers in the tarpaulin. We have given the opportunity to other suppliers to get to the same level. Okay, which for me is a bit the same rationality of what Shima was saying with the solar, the renewable energy. It's not just that they change just for our product, is that they are going to change for all what they are distributing. And this has higher impact, even if we cannot measure. So then for sure, there is a lot of discussion on how it needs to be produced, how the first supplier had managed to change the production to make it stronger with less material. And then you need to do lab tests on the UV, you need to do lab tests on the strength, and this takes months, okay? So we are not there yet, so I hope we will be there soon. Now it seems it's soon. And it's a bit the same with the solar lamp. With the solar lamp, there is a lot of discussions on how we are going to be able to measure what we are asking for. Because again, this is not just saying, okay, green specifications, please supply. We don't check, I'm green, I'm reducing 60% and I'm done my work. We are really trying to see. And this work is huge. There is, for example, we have been looking at one certificate that one organization is already using, but for us, it doesn't work because that will increase our price 100%. So, it is much more complicated. So I can show it here. It sounds very good. And I knew she will ask the question. Otherwise, I will have said it from the beginning. Because even that takes time. If we want to do things right, it takes time. And it's not a shame, it's good. That, I think we need to say in front of people, look, it's not maybe we're doing it wrong, maybe it's taking us too long because, whatever, okay? So I put it on me, but really, even if we try, sometimes it's not that simple. So,
Thank you. Priya.
I try to be short this time.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I think one of the barriers we see is evidence. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, it might seem like we have already a lot of evidence, but the reality actually we don't have so much evidence. And I think currently when we do LCA type of work, it's just an entry point. I think we need to overlay the initial LCA work with additional evidence and analysis about especially market dynamics. When we start thinking about how to decarbonize a product, it means at some point engaging manufacturers very distantly through procurement levers or very directly, undertaking direct negotiation with them. And currently, the work we've been doing really, the LCA is really great starting point again, but we felt really the need to pressure test our own assumption, engage directly manufacturers to sort of find ways to support them and incentivize them towards low carbon production because they have their own challenges. So understanding also things from their side. And we know actually for health product market and human material markets, it's the same. They are heavily price-driven markets. So eventually, I would say the margins to think about decarbonization are pretty small. Although some decarbonization can be achieved at zero cost, that's for sure. It's pretty critical. So we need to engage with manufacturers to make sure actually we reassure the market. We're not creating market instability. We're not creating additional hurdles or additional requirements that are very difficult to face, especially when those products really serve populations and countries that really need them. I see barriers that are more supply side type of barrier. We know some manufacturers started to do their journey, but they haven't completed their journey. Some of them are doing just because their investors are pushing them to reduce their carbon emissions. Some of them it's because the regulations. But it's very rare actually when they're taking really the journey full hands-on, and they need to be supported in doing that, technically speaking and financially speaking. And last but not least, I think there's quite a variety of market level or ecosystem barriers. Sometimes regulations doesn't help, doesn't support decarbonization agenda. So I think taking this sort of a holistic approach, trying to understand where the barriers are on the markets, because we're speaking about product markets here, it's pretty important. Covering also, of course, the demand side there.
And I think you answered a lot of the points that we have a question in the chat from a medical wholesaler saying that how do you think we can improve our joint efforts to improve sustainable sourcing? We are doing our best to reduce our environmental impact in humanitarian supply chains. And at the same time, we are very much demand driven, and they do not see sustainability criteria embedded in requirements of clients. So, and I think, we don't have time to go in further details, but I think it echoes what you said. It's really also about trying to understand the position of the manufacturers. Do we have one super urgent question in the room? Okay. Maybe in 2 sentences, any advice, or maybe one, any advice that you would like to give to organizations that are planning to perform LCAs, like just super quick in a few words? Okay. I put you on the spot, Ashima.
I would say, no, that's okay. I would say please go for a collaborative effort. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel every single time. Our efforts are also to try to standardize, open source, rely on others' work, make our work reliable as well. And so I think any organization intending to measure impact, whether in an LCA or a footprint or anything, should try to use studies and work that is already done and then start from there instead of starting from scratch every single time. I don't think it is necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, also building on that, I would say that there's a lot of products in the humanitarian sector that are also commercial products, and there's still a lot of LCAs done, a lot of studies. So I think not just looking at humanitarian, what's been done for humanitarian, but seeing also just in general, the general research. There's a lot.
What I wanted to say has already been said, so I don't think I have
on the implementation part then.
No, exactly. So the life cycle analyses are there to get the results and say what can be done next. And that's why it's so important from these life cycle analysis that we have all the stakeholders, because then we will actually learn during the life cycle analysis what is much more feasible or less. So yeah.
Yeah, probably I'll echo everything that's been said, but just add maybe, I think climate change is here for the long-term play. So we need to develop long-term play strategies. So LCA is just the beginning of a long journey, and we should not only aim for the quick wins. We really need to engage for the longer run here, and that probably requires us to create a critical mass around us and find our own ecosystem to do that, to have the right stamina, but also have the right skills. And again, the critical mass is pretty important to move the needle there.
Great. I have nothing more to add here. Thank you very much. I think we covered a lot, and thanks a lot to all of you for your inputs and insights. Thank you.
Thank you.